Hi, and welcome to an episode on my YouTube channel. I have a very good guest with me here today. His name is Fred Sargeant. He is one of the co-founders of the LGBT Alliance in the United States and has been a gay rights activist for his whole life. So without further ado, let's just welcome Fred in. Hi, Fred. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. It's quite warm here today.
That's good. It's been a beautiful day here in Brighton, England as well. I am actually in Brighton, England, and not in Iceland, but I'm still fronting a little bit of this take back of our movement in Iceland on the same. Iceland is a
Yep.
very small country, as you probably know, with only 380,000 people. So you can only imagine how small the gay community in Iceland is. So it's difficult for people to find the courage of to speak up. But
Well,
that is changing, which is good,
I, I
and
think
that's
that was a big,
people like you and the LGBT Alliance and other you know gay rights pioneers. But if we start, Fred, by with you telling the Icelandic audience a little bit about who you are and when you started and what brought you here.
well, I was a young man who moved to New York in my teens and became involved immediately in the gay rights movement, such as it was back in those days. It was very small, very colloquial. The Many of the people involved didn't use their real names. I always used my name. I was inspired by my partner then, Craig Rodwell, who felt the gay movement had to take a next step into being more public and more forthright. And so I had spent time there working in the homophile youth movement and along with other groups like Mattachine in the US and some of the lesbian groups.
Okay. Um, you were quite known as well for having been at the Stonewall riots in 1969. Just sort of in short, what can you tell us about what happened there? Because there are some stories going around that it was trans women of color who started the riots and et cetera, et cetera. But you were one of the few people who actually have that can give an eyewitness account of what actually went on. So it would be very nice of you to explain to the Icelandic audience what happened in New York in Christopherstræti in June in
Well,
1969.
we had been out to dinner with friends that night. It was a typical warm late June night in New York, and we were on our way home. And part of our route home took us past the Stonewall Inn, and as we approached it, we could see that there was a crowd gathering out front. Uh, Many of the people were yelling. We quickly learned that there was a police raid underway inside, and we stayed to see what was going to happen. Um, the the idea that the rioting or the activism that occurred there that night was in any way led by trans women of color is a false idea. Um, as Craig so aptly put it, there in an interview uh, shortly after the events, he said there were maybe a dozen drag queens there. Well, there were 500 to 700 young men that were there, and the drag queens really had no influence on the crowd that had gathered. Um, so, I try to point that out as often as I can publicly. Uh, but it's not just me saying so; it's historians who say so. The most famous of whom is David Carter, who wrote the book Stonewall,
Yeah.
as well as Martin Duberman, Toby Murata, uh, Eric Marcus. They don't confirm anything along the lines that this was an event led and created by trans women of color.
No, exactly. And this is what we have known all along. Do you know anything about how um, this history falsification started? Where does it come from? Who started changing this story?
I don't really know who started it. I first became aware of it back in 2019. I had been invited to an event in Paris, and when I got there, I heard the Stonewall story being told by people on the event night, and I didn't recognize the story that they were telling me. I was there with a lesbian, Flavia Rando, and she had been at Stonewall the following night, and her reaction was somewhat similar to mine. This was not what we knew to be the case.
No, exactly. It's actually quite interesting how quickly false narratives are spun and spread, because even Icelandic youth who more and more sort of subscribe to this let's call it queer theory ideology, or what have you, they also use this false narrative as some sort of a gotcha token when they are in conversation with homosexual people. But I don't know whether you know that the Stonewall riots have very, very little significance in the gay rights history in Scandinavia in general, because homosexuality was already legalized throughout the Nordic region in the 30s. So it's quite.
That's what we were shooting for, to try to get the same thing to happen. One other thing I should say is that when I do think about how this came about, this false narrative, I put a lot of the blame on people using the internet as a source, as opposed to using historians as sources. And the internet is, as we know, full of falsehoods. And to rely on just that has been the cause of much of the problem.
No, exactly. And, it's a shame that you weren't at the LGBT Alliance conference on Friday, because there was some really, really good speeches there. And one thing in particular that sort of struck me was the keynote from Kate Harris and Bev Jackson, where they explained that children and youth today are actually being brought up in front of a screen, and very often in a completely different country to where they actually are. Right. And that's a really, really, and that hits home because it's actually true. Especially when you think about Danish, Norwegian, and Icelandic youth starting to refer to the Stonewall riots as the beginning of gay rights in their own region, which is completely untrue. I would also like to ask you. You have noticed the big changes in our movement over the last few years, like myself and others have, which sort of, let's say it. You had a little bit of a climax, or shall I call it anti-climax, at the Pride event where you are. Can you tell us what happened?
Well, I started protesting at the Burlington Pride last year. It didn't have a problem when I did it. I held one sign that said "queer, not gay," or I'm sorry, "gay, not queer," and the reaction was muted. And when I went this year, I had added an additional sign, and that was because last year, right after the march, there were several articles about drag events in local high schools, and the press coverage was, really over the top in celebrating this event. I've been a critic of drag all of my life, and I wrote a commentary piece that I submitted to the online journal, which they chose to not publish, but it caused me to think of what I would do the following year, meaning this year. And that was, I had a second sign, and it was a circle with a red line through it that said "blackface, woman face." It was a very simple, direct message that I knew people could get. And the reaction by the Pride marchers was most immediate. One group in particular, Outright Vermont, they're a group that transes children. And one of their members separated from the group, and I saw him coming towards me, but I didn't think anything of it. I just continued to hold my sign. And I should say also that my protest was in a very American tradition of silent protest. I was inspired as a young man by the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-ins at the lunch counters, where people went in, sat down, and took abuse from the people that didn't want them to sit at the lunch counter. So with that in mind, I conducted my protest. The reaction from this one person was, he stole my sign. I'm disabled, I move about on a cane. And he was so busy trying to rip up the sign that I was able to catch up with him, with a little adrenaline, and take my sign back. I went back to where I had been and resumed what I was doing, silently protesting. And the crowd that gathered from that group, Outright Vermont, became increasingly boisterous, trying to block the view of my signs. I held them as high as I could. I have trouble with my shoulders, so that's a little difficult. But I kept going. One woman poured coffee on me from behind. People were slapping me on the back of the head, and eventually, towards the end, I was knocked to the ground.
I take it as it was all, youth or people in
Yeah.
the 20s, 30s. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
obscene. It's unbelievable that people and gay rights veterans like yourself have to endure such a thing. It's, I've been following, and probably some of the viewers as well have been following what's been happening. Has the mayor of Burlington said anything? Has there been any results of the police investigation that was underway, or?
No, I haven't heard from the mayor at all. The mayor, in fact, was questioned at his mayor's meeting a few mornings after the event, and he went out of his way to not say anything about it. He was asked twice if he would condemn the violence, and he didn't. What he did do, though, was express concern for the safety of trans people, and that they feel unsafe. I don't know what he was basing that on. He didn't tell anyone there. But no, I haven't heard from the mayor at all. And I would certainly think that by now he would have reached out. This is something that happened in his city. And a little bit of background, Burlington's been having a significant violence problem due to short staffing in the police department. And this is probably another reason. There were no police present during the march.
Were they maybe not requested to be there, or maybe not welcome? Because some pride organizations have actually expressively said that the police is not welcome. Is that maybe the case in Burlington as well?
Well, it's a little confusing. The parade itself has a contingent in it of no police. They don't want police at Pride. They don't want police policing the event, which is really an abrogation of responsibility by the police if they follow those requests. The police are responsible for order, and obviously they weren't there to prevent what happened or to take action when it did. The group itself, they really didn't understand what had happened. They didn't understand the purpose of the demonstration. They certainly don't understand the meaning of the First Amendment and the right to peacefully protest. And they have no respect for that. After they had knocked me to the ground and someone helped me to get back up, I could see that the end of the parade was just passing. So my protest was over and I turned to leave. As I turned to leave, they cheered as though they had accomplished something. And they really didn't understand what had happened. And that's because they are people without honor.
Yeah, this is what, yeah, exactly. This is what leads me to the next segment or question that I have for you, because obviously what we have been seeing over the last, let's say, decade, I think the last decade has been quite formative towards the situation that we find ourselves in now. Seems that queer theory really has taken stronghold in the universities, both in England and in the whole Western world, really. And the people who seem to be following or believing this ideology, they seem to be very authoritarian and have very little compassion or yeah, let's say they have very little interest in other people's opinions. So plurality of views is not accepted, and we're seeing this more and more. I'm not an expert on queer theory, but the little that I've read is I find it deeply concerning. You know, that it seems to be sort of muddling barriers and boundaries between childhood and adulthood, and sort of giving or legitimizing all kinds of fetishism and yeah, behaviors that society still hasn't sort of come to accept. What do you have? What do you know? What can you tell me about queer theory or your opinion of it?
Well, what I've described them as on many occasions are as being rainbow brown shirts. That their authoritarianism is very apparent. They will not tolerate people who don't think as they do, and that presents another problem, which is their thinking keeps changing. You can't depend on what they said last week to be what they're thinking next week. It's a very fluid ideology, which is part of its danger. People subscribe to it without really knowing what they're subscribing to. And if you've spent any time looking at queer theory, you understand that it is about destroying values. It's about destroying relationships, and the pedophilic underpinnings of queer theory are very apparent, both from its founders and creators and from the people who subscribe to it today.
Yeah, this is what also what I find deeply concerning is in Iceland we have only had one gay rights organization, if you like, which is sort of Stonewall equivalent organization, which was founded in 1978. And I remember the years when I was coming out in the 90s. It was, you know, it was like a community center for gay men and lesbians with, you know, an occasional, you know, a bar night where we, you know, had a couple of beers, or and there was an access to library, you know, a gay library, etc. Now that organization has sort of morphed into a sort of a hybrid organization, best described as a Stonewall / mermaids, where the focus is now on children and youth. I mean, for example, yesterday it's quite scary that they were having a support meeting for trans youth up to the age of 12. It sort of demonstrates where the movement's focus has gone to. In Iceland, we also have a legislation now before Parliament to ban so-called conversion therapy, and taken into context that the Church of Iceland, which is a state-sponsored religion, allows same-sex marriages in the church. So conversion therapy within religious settings and well, let's face it, within psychiatry is nowhere near to the cruel methods that were used in the in the past. When we talk to when we remember lobotomy or electrodes or anything like that. What do you think could be the objective for these people trying to push ban on conversion therapy, and where they include where they try to sort of ban it under the guise of sexuality, gender identity, and gender expression, knowing that now the queer movement have they've already defined over, I think it's like 30 sexualities or 72 genders. I mean, what do you think could be the aim of putting forward such a legislation in 2022?
Well, at its root, at its very heart, it's manipulation of language. As you were pointing out, I think we're frozen again.
No, we're not. Are you there? Fred? Fred?
Okay, we're back.
Yeah, brilliant. So you were saying about manipulation of language.
Yes, the conversion therapy, the way they're using the term, it's manipulative. They are in fact the ones that are doing the converting. They are the ones that are converting predominantly lesbian and gay youth, and it's not just me saying that; it's many medical uh, uh, groups that will confirm that if you leave the children alone, they will develop into young lesbians and gay men, following a natural path of development. What they try to do is freeze things in that moment, and that's where I say the conversion has occurred, because they're not watching and waiting, they're not giving the children proper care that is geared towards a more holistic approach to their health. They're trying to freeze things and then say, going forward, all things will be trans, which is not the way humans develop.
No, exactly. And the organization that we have founded now in Iceland, and we are obviously a sister organization of the LGBT Alliance, and but obviously we are independent and everything of that. We are now actually putting through a submission to the Icelandic Parliament where we actually reject the legislation as it is put forward, because we do believe that there can be, well, there are some serious safeguarding concerns when it comes to ethical explorative psychotherapy for youth with gender dysphoria and other underlying mental health issues, because usually, well, I haven't heard of any case of anyone just having gender dysphoria. There is usually another comorbidities that are associated with that. So taking away the tools from ethical psychiatrists and psychologists is a very, very dangerous path to go on. So at the moment we have to be against that legislation.
Well,
Also,
if I might say something here,
yes,
you're seeing the same thing going on in other Scandinavian countries like Finland, Sweden. They're rethinking what they had originally done and coming to the same conclusion that the Brits are coming to, that they
yes,
need to rethink this entire matter. Presently in Spain, there's legislation being considered, it's called trans law, and the psychiatrists and psychologists in Spain are saying, wait a minute,
yeah,
this is not proper care. for these children. So yeah, I'm actually hopeful at this point that enough people are talking about this, that
I
there's
am
going to
actually
be Western world.
I share that optimism with you. I'm even more optimistic than I was just a year ago. I think there's been a lot of development, and thanks a lot to the activism in the United Kingdom and what is happening with CAS review, which is probably it's going to be the most important uh, research and that we're going to have in the area. Um, Also, when it comes to manipulation of language, Fred, Iceland has already introduced self-ID and it has enacted an act of sex autonomy, which makes it possible. It's probably very similar to Bill C-16 and the human rights codes of Canada, where you can actually just go and register as a woman and then you are legally one. Uh, Obviously, because of the pandemic, we haven't had massive issues arising because of the law and also because of the size of the country. But these issues will arise, I'm sure. When it comes to identities out of the gender binary, Iceland has already made up, or the organization Stonewall/Mermaids, which is called the Queer Organization of Iceland. They are trying to push now new newspeak words for adults who are non-binary and children who are non-binary, and trying to get those words into the statute books. So I think people should maybe look into what is happening in Iceland and have it served as a little bit of a warning what self-ID laws will lead to. Have you seen any sort of more, new words or manipulation of language happening on your side in the United States in this regard?
Yes, that's definitely a component of what the genderists are trying to do by seizing control of language. We have a problem with a complicit press here that buys into what they're doing. So much so that they make false statements regarding people who are in opposition to this. I've been labeled as anti-trans. Well, if by anti-trans they mean someone who has supported equal rights for trans people, then I guess you would call me anti-trans. If by anti-trans you mean somebody who has many transgender supporters online and for women, then yes, I guess you'd say anti-trans. So it's a manipulation of language that's going on that we have to fight by our statements as forcefully as we can.
Yeah, the thing is also when we've been referring to trans within this umbrella of ours, if you like, I mean we always regarded them as same-sex attracted transsexuals, and that was sort of self-explanatory when they were there. But now trans is like completely different, and you have transsexual people who actually speak out the same way we do, being ostracized the very same way as we are. Which shows completely what is happening and what kind of authoritarianism has taken hold of the movement.
As a matter of fact, on the day after the Burlington demonstration, I did my first interview about it, and it was with a trans male in California.
Yes.
Angel, and
yeah.
So I have connections with the trans community. And they go deeper than people realize.
Yeah, so do I. So do I. I have a very, very good and strong connections with a lot of transsexual people who are very, very concerned about what is happening, the same way that we are. So that's very good to have them there, because it sort of gives a little bit of voice of reason. Because obviously, nobody is against how adult people choose and want to live their life and what makes them happy. What is concerning is why children suddenly have become the center focus of the movement, and that is very daunting, if you like, and that is something that I would like to sort of, try to find out, why that is, why have children become this the focus of this movement. I mean,
If I could say by using Deep Throat's words in Watergate, follow the money.
yeah,
Because
that's the thing.
that is where the benefit comes to people who trans children. Those
Yeah.
children require lifelong medical care as a result of the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones that they take at a very early age. It won't stop, and the doctors will make loads of money caring for these people.
Yeah, I'm very concerned as well. There's another project going on at the level of the Prime Minister in Iceland. She is very, very, very eager to become that Iceland becomes the top or ranking top on ILGA's rainbow map. Malta has currently been leading the rainbow map there, but I have actually experienced, I have lived in Malta for a couple of years, and I tell you, you can't legislate tolerance. Tolerance takes time. You need to change mindsets, and you don't legislate to change mindsets. And without saying much about Malta, I mean, let's just say it's very close to Sicily, and and there's a little bit of Sicily of the north going on in Iceland, if you ask me. Iceland has nothing to prove in these matters, so I don't quite understand why they want to be on top of that particular map, because the goalpost keeps changing, because
Right.
we have, like I said, we have same-sex marriages in the church. We can adopt. I mean, there is nothing there's nothing that we cannot do that is, and we don't lack any protections in our constitution. So I think, let's say, the money-making machine of human rights campaign maybe got to the better of some of the organizations that changed their focus, and that's concerning.
Well, that is something that we can point to that happened. That when certain issues became resolved, like gay marriage, what happened was contributions to these organizations dropped off.
Yeah.
It's in their tax forms. You can track this, and so they needed to find another way to bring in money, and that's the way they've done it. One of the organizations here in Vermont, I looked at their past tax forms, and when they were a gay and lesbian organization, they had a certain amount of income. When they made the switch to becoming gender oriented, that's when their funding came in at a higher rate. In fact, the increase was so great, it was unheard of among nonprofits to have that kind of increase and to have it sustained in the following years. Sometimes you get a donor who passes away and they leave you a couple $1 million. That's not what's happened here. They've got sustained income that continues to come in while they promulgate genderism.
Yeah, no, exactly, and obviously using people. I mean, Iceland changed so quickly in the 90s and noughties for gay people, because it happened so fast that people's opinion of gay people changed. It was through joyous and good and healthy social discourse that happened. And now, obviously, this queer theory subscribers have sort of attached themselves to the back of that success. And now, when focusing children, the average Joe, and Joan think like, oh yeah, we don't want to repeat the same mistake again. And now let's think about the children. So it's like, it's very, very difficult to explain to the average heterosexual Icelandic person who doesn't really know, and doesn't really give that side of reality, any thought, because they just know gay people are there and that's there, and they're busy living their life, so they are not as aware what has been going on. So now when you explain it to them, they actually get a little bit, shocked what's been going on, because they just think, we have to support everything that comes from there because of, what happened in the past, and we don't want to make that mistake.
That's all part of the Denton methodology.
That is,
Yeah.
that is, and I actually encourage people to Google and check what the Denton files are. There are even Icelandic activists that have written the forward of the Denton document is actually even written by an Icelandic trans activist who is often referred to by the media, by the Icelandic media, as an expert in queer theory. So,
Right.
So, and that's the activists. These are the activists that get all the airtime in the mainstream Icelandic media, and that is something that needs changing, because queer theory, if scrutinized, doesn't hold to any, it can't sustain itself, So, and very often, I have personally asked to debate people about, queer theory and other things, but they won't do it, because I think they know how frail the ideology is. What do you think?
Oh, I think that's a definite component, that it's hard to argue for something that has problems in it. So
Yeah.
part of the method that they've been using is, as you no doubt have heard, no debate.
Yeah.
If they can keep people from talking, then they don't have to answer questions.
Yeah, this is also what is happening now. There's a work group in Iceland working with the prime minister now to make a legislation for hate speech, and I am a bit concerned that it is exactly because the legislation is being put forward now also with the conversion therapy ban, because let's ban the ethical therapies, and let's ban people from criticizing what's going on. So well, we're trying to do what we can to stop it. Luckily, you have the First Amendment in the United States. We don't have that, unfortunately, but here's hoping that that we will not be silenced by legislation. So.
Yes, and I see that's happening in Norway as well.
Oh, yes. Norway is in dire straits, and I've been in contact with Christina Ellingsen there, and it's absolutely horrendous. And that's something that I also intend to do on my channel, is to speak with other activists in the Nordic region and about here. But Fred, thank you very much for talking with me. I just thought it was very appropriate to get you on, since like we said, the false narratives that have been spread also in Scandinavia through this queer theory ideology and the gender identity lobby. So it's very good to have all these things cleared up, and good to sort of touch base to see what's going on your side of the Atlantic. So thank you very much for coming.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.